Here with us now is Jamil Jaffer. Jamil's founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University. Welcome as always. What about that? That all of that setup, said that they got on stage today and said, all right, we're making progress. We've made substantive progress. Do you think that's true?
Well, Connell, it's hard to know. We don't have any details on what security guarantees were agreed to. But if, in fact, the U.S. and France have been able to make progress and they can get Russia and Ukraine on board, this could be an important step forward in ultimately resolving this conflict. Of course, the biggest challenge in play is what of Ukraine's territory, which was unlawfully taken by Russia both in 2014 and again in 2022, will Ukraine get back as part of this deal? And if the answer is zero, that's going to be a real challenge for everyone involved, including the United States and Europe, and particularly Ukraine, to swallow.
Yeah, you don't want to set up some sort of sweetheart deal for Russia. That's been the concern since President Trump started speaking the way that he's been speaking about this, right? I mean, is that where you think we're going? Is that your concern as well?
That's exactly right, Connell. I mean, what you can't do is encourage this kind of behavior. We saw this happen in 2014 with President Obama, when we essentially didn't do anything, allowed Vladimir Putin to take Crimea. And what does Vladimir Putin do? 2022, he comes after it again. And so if we allow Vladimir Putin to get away with what he did under President Obama, under President Trump, he'll just do it again later. We'll talk about more of Ukraine. We're talking about the Baltics. We're talking potentially even about Poland. And, of course, the U.S. would then be drawn into a conflict because the Baltic states and Poland are NATO members.
Yeah, Macron said exactly that today when he was up there, talking about the past. I mean, he's been around a while, and he's dealt with Putin in past negotiations and even in negotiations about this very war, where Putin's gone back on his word, as Macron pointed out. The other thing he pointed out is he thought this was an interesting moment in the Oval. You're watching the back and forth there. That really, when they were shaking hands and stuff and giving that kind of stuff, was really because Trump was telling a story about how, Macron had said something in French that he didn't understand. And he said he was pulling a fast one on him. So they were joking around about that. But then there was a moment I thought was interesting, speaking in English, where Macron corrected Trump on all this stuff about who's putting in how much money. Because President Trump's been exaggerating the amount of money the U.S. has been putting into this war and kind of underestimating, at least by our count, the amount the Europeans have been putting in. So here's what Macron said.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the U.S., loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear, if at the end of the day in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day, and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me.
No, you saw Trump there, and then this kind of thing when he was speaking. But we looked up the numbers. First of all, there's the 300 or 350 billion is way too high. The U.S. is not, something like 180 some billion as far as we can tell, and Europe, rather than 100 billion, is in for closer to 200 billion by the count of things. Here's some of the aid coming in by country. Yeah, some of it's loans, but some of it's not, which is what Macron was starting to say there. Does all this matter? What do you say?
Well, look, at the end of the day, the amount of money the United States has put in is a huge amount, right? Whether it's individually or relative to anybody else. But at the end of the day, the question is what's going to happen now as a result of that? All that money's been poured in. Ukraine's been defended. It's lost some of its territory. Who's going to pay it back? Is it the Ukrainians or the Russians who started this conflict? Let's be very clear. Everyone should understand this. The Russians invaded a sovereign country, Ukraine, and we went along with our allies and defended that nation by putting money and weapons into that fight. So if anybody owes us money, it's Russia who started this whole thing from the jump.
Right. Not Ukraine, by the way. Is it interesting to you, all this talk about the minerals? I mean, I have some of it on the tablet here. Trump claims, the president, that we're close to this minerals deal with Ukraine, right, where they would take some of these rare earth minerals. You see some of them here, lithium and graphite, titanium, and they would be able to do some sort of a deal between the United States and Ukraine. But I do think this last column is really interesting. China, that maybe there's some sense here that if we can be a little bit less reliant on China, cut a deal with Ukraine, that maybe this does work in our favor. How do you see it?
Well, look, Connell, no doubt that if we can get critical minerals from Ukraine, that would be great as part of this deal. That would be very helpful to the United States. But remember, you have to think about two things with critical minerals. One is how you get them out of the ground, but then two, how you process them. And a lot of critical minerals, China controls the processing. So we've got to be able to do that in the United States or in Europe or in allied partners as well. And then on top of all this, Connell, you want to talk about a huge treasure of critical minerals that we didn't touch? Afghanistan, which we walked away from. President Trump cut the deal. Joe Biden executed that horrific withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's where a ton of critical minerals is. And we walked away from that, even though we had fought for that country and fought against al-Qaeda and the Taliban for 2 decades plus.
All right, let's wrap it up this way, big picture. Where do you see all of this going? Are you optimistic? Do you think there is a deal to be had and one that's fair that doesn't essentially throw Ukraine under the bus?
Well, look, there's a deal to be had, and there's a deal that's fair. The question is, will this administration get to that deal? And look, early signs were promising. Early signs, the president said he's going to get a good deal done. More recent signs, like this vote against the UN resolution on Russian aggression, is a mistake and actually reduces our leverage, doesn't increase it, Connell.
Jamil, thanks as always. Jamil Jaffer with us on Ukraine today.